In the early hours of an August Monday in 1911, Vincenzo Peruggia sits huddled in a dimly lit staircase at the Louvre. His face is dripping with sweat as he quickly removes his white smock and wraps it around a small painting, a painting he isn't supposed to have, one that he believes belongs in Italy, not France. What he carries out of the back doors of the Louvre is the Mona Lisa, Italian painter Leonardo da Vinci's Renaissance masterpiece. This isn't just any painting. It is the painting. The stunning portrait of Lisa del Gioconda is largely regarded as one of the greatest works of art of all time, and that fame is in large part thanks to the theft by Vincenzo, which caused the world to give a new focus to the painting. What the world saw when it returned to France 2 years later was that smile. A smile that was the result of da Vinci's dedication to learning science as well as art. His knowledge of facial muscles guided his hands to paint her elusive smile. The painting would become one of the world's greatest meetings of art and science. Nearly a century later, a machine would grace the cobblestone streets of Italy. That, too, was a combination of engineering and poetry. The creation of a man who crossed great oceans, worked his way up from humble beginnings, and stood up to the world's supercar titans. What he created would be an orchestra powered by 12 cylinders, a beautiful sculpture made of composites. The Pagani Zonda was a modern masterpiece, a supercar that stood on its own as Lamborghinis became stale and old, and Ferraris became clinical and boring. Pagani Zonda spilled its colorful paint across the streets of Italy and breathed life back into Modena. This is the story of a breakthrough performance from a true virtuoso. A tale spun of carbon fiber and 95 octane. This is the story of Horacio Pagani's opening act, Modena, Italy. In the 1980s, it is home to some of the greatest car makers in the world, De Tomaso, Ferrari, and, of course, Lamborghini. The early 80s were Lamborghini's heyday. Coming off the success of the Miura, their next creation would be a standout hit, the Countach. Sure, it was uncomfortable, hard to drive, and impossible to see out of. But the Countach was undeniably a work of moving art, and for a brief moment, Lamborghini was on top of the world. But that moment would not last. As the 80s dragged on, no one could afford to buy their fantastic machines, and Lamborghini could hardly afford to make them. Italian passion gave in to American industrialism as Chrysler took over Lamborghini, and the sun appeared to be setting on the Italian automotive renaissance. Modena started to look like a ghost town, and Italian supercar posters were being replaced by the rising stars from Japan and Britain. Lamborghini was staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. De Tomaso quietly faded away, and Fiat tried desperately to save both Maserati and Ferrari. Thankfully, though, during all this turmoil, a young man was sweeping the shop floors of Lamborghini's factory, and he had something to prove. One of Italy's most notable designer stories doesn't start in Florence or Rome, but Argentina, the birthplace of the ballpoint pen, cartoons, and, of course, chimichurri. I quite enjoy the taste of chimichurri. It has a delightful brightness and flavor that brings out the umami flavors of meats, such as filet mignon, prime rib, and even swordfish. Nice. Perhaps the most notable creation of Argentina would come in 1955, when a boy named Horacio Pagani was born in the town of Casilda. Horacio's parents raised him on the meager salary of a baker and a music teacher. It was barely enough to keep them afloat, meaning that when Horacio wanted a bicycle, he had to build one out of spare parts. He would use that bicycle to ride around town and admire cars. And one of his first fascinations was with one of the most important sports cars ever made, the Jaguar E-Type. Look, it just cannot be overstated how many designers found their muse in Jaguar's open-top sports car. It's certainly a topic worth covering in the future. Horacio found an E-Type in his city and spent hours examining every detail of the shapely machine. There weren't very many nice cars in this small South American town, so the chance to be up close and personal with such an influential car was life-changing. That E-Type was a revelation for young Horacio, that a car could be so stunning and so beautiful with curves like a beautiful woman and with the roar of a lion bellowing beneath its skin. From then on, Horacio's focus was narrowed between his music lessons. He would read racing magazines and carve his favorite cars out of wood. And in those magazines, he learned about the Italian city of Modena, where the world's most beautiful sports cars were bent from steel and aluminum, the holy Italian temples of Maserati, Lamborghini, and Ferrari. Maybe it was the half-Italian blood coursing through his veins, but Horacio knew that he would one day call Italy home, and there he would make his own cars. Throughout his teenage years, Horacio fixed things for locals in his workshop. The work within those walls would refine his skills and push him to develop a core philosophy with his hands. He would create art, play piano, carve wood, and bend metal. And with his mind, he would engineer, repair machines, build bicycles, and design dream cars like Leonardo da Vinci. Pagani would seek to combine art and science. By 1973, Horacio had set off for college to pursue majors in both engineering and art, all the while running a successful business back home, creating a variety of products like bar stools and campers. But in the late 1970s, he finally got around to fulfilling his passion, creating a car, the best kind of car, a racing car. Horacio penned the aerodynamic body of his Formula 2 car with confidence, but he lacked the engineering know-how to build an engine for it. So he reached out to Renault, which was one of the few companies with any presence in Argentina at the time. With his designs in hand, he demanded Renault give him an engine and allow him to be part of the Renault factory team. They acquiesced. Their results in Formula 2 were not earth-shattering, but it was still an impressive feat for a college kid to build a competitive racing car. And this being the late 1970s, everyone was looking for another Gordon Murray to appear. Renault saw in Horacio that same spark and reached out to Horacio to get him more involved. To break the ice, they brought with them another Argentinian Formula One champion, Juan Manuel Fangio. Horacio and Fangio became fast friends, and Horacio signed on to the Renault team as a design consultant. To inspire young Horacio, his new friend took him all over to meet the heads of Fiat and Mercedes, whom he had driven for in the past. For Fangio, it was a chance for him to pass on his decades of racing knowledge and an excuse to party with young Horacio. For Horacio, it was his first real experience with rubbing shoulders with the automotive giants. This experience was the final straw. Horacio knew what he needed to do, and in 1983 he packed his bags and moved to Modena. He arrived in Italy with no real prospects, carrying a tent, a bicycle, and, most importantly, 5 letters of recommendation from Fangio. He would take those letters to all of Italy's finest sports car companies begging for a job, but he was turned down by Fiat, De Tomaso, Maserati, and Ferrari. Last on his list was Lamborghini, the makers of Italy's most beautiful machines, a perfect home for Horacio and his dreams of feminine-shaped sports cars. But they, too, said no. With nothing left to lose, he showed up at Lamborghini's door anyway, and they begrudgingly gave a young man his dream job. Young Horacio enters the hallowed halls of Italy's finest supercar builder, Automobile Lamborghini, a shining icon of Sant'Agata Bolognese. As he stands, surrounded by the men who built the 350 GT and the Miura, he stares with mouth agape, stars in his eyes, and a broom in his hand. Horacio Pagani is now the official janitor of Lamborghini. Every morning, he would climb on his bicycle, leave his little shack on the outskirts of town, and get to work, cleaning up cigar ash and oil stains in the shadow of machines he could only dream of designing. Dirty, crummy job or not, his passion had not waned with hard work and patience. Horacio soon found himself rising through the ranks thanks to his wealth of experience shipping fiberglass back in Argentina. He got a spot on the new composite materials team. Their first project was creating the bodywork of the wild, way ahead of its time Italian war machine, the LM002, a massive Humvee-like truck. It was a pretty weird departure for a sports car brand, and the V12-powered off-road beast was a critical failure for Lamborghini, but it was a career boost for Horacio himself. He had proven himself to the higher-ups of Lamborghini and even befriended famed test driver Valentino Balboni. His next test, then, was to finally work on a real Lamborghini, restyling and adding deposits to the unloved Jalpa. By 1987, his dreams were on the cusp of finally being realized. He was a chief engineer overseeing the composites department and had become obsessed with a new material called carbon fiber, a strong, space-age composite material that had proven itself on the racetrack. Horacio wanted nothing more than to build the new special edition Countach out of the revolutionary material. All he needed was an autoclave, and his team at Lamborghini could get to work. The heads of Lamborghini, though, didn't really care about carbon fiber. I mean, after all, Lamborghinis weren't racing, and Ferrari didn't build carbon fiber at the time. So why should they even work for a boss who just doesn't get it? I sure have. That was not ideal. Anyway, when you work for an out-of-touch, lazy, and uninspired boss, sometimes you have to just do it yourself to prove he was right to Lamborghini. Horacio went to the bank and took out a gigantic loan and bought his own autoclave. Now, for those who don't know, an autoclave is basically a giant oven and a vacuum chamber used to form and strengthen molded carbon fiber. They're massive and expensive machines. And Horacio just showed up one day with one at Lamborghini, working with sheets of carbon fiber and developing new techniques from scratch. Horacio and his special deposits team would build the world's fastest Lamborghini, the Countach Evoluzione, an oddly shaped but stunning tech demo made out of carbon fiber, Kevlar, and aluminum. The use of these new materials allowed Horacio's team to shrink the weight of the Countach to less than that of a Mazda Miata, and it was still powered by that massive Lamborghini V12, meaning this new Countach was capable of hitting 60 miles per hour in nearly 4 seconds and soaring to over 200 miles per hour. It was a concept car that was faster than the fastest car in the world at the time, the Porsche 959. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but it was proof that Pagani knew what he was talking about. He was fervent in his belief that these new materials were the future of sports cars. But Lamborghini continued to ignore him, and probably because they were flat broke, the thought of building cars out of more expensive materials using huge autoclaves likely scared the heads of Lamborghini away from the idea. It was the late 80s, supercar sales had plummeted, and even though at the time Lamborghini was a small company, they just couldn't pivot to a new way of making cars. This, of course, frustrated Pagani. His philosophy was that cars should be both beautiful and functional at all costs. They shouldn't be designed with profitability in mind. He didn't care if anyone bought them. He just saw sports cars as art worthy of existing just to exist. After struggling with trying to push the Italian bull in a new direction, he shook hands with his engineers, packed up his autoclave, and left. What was it about carbon fiber that drove Horacio Pagani to leave his dream job at Lamborghini to pursue its use? His obsession with the material was probably thanks to his lifelong mentor, the legendary Juan Manuel Fangio, a man whose career had been marked by incredible talent, but also an almost unbelievable string of misfortune. Fangio's racing history was a story of survival against all odds, a history that somehow mirrored Horacio's own struggle to overcome adversity in the automotive world. Fangio was a magnet for automotive disasters throughout his entire career. In 1948, he famously drove off a cliff during a rally, a harrowing accident that claimed the life of his co-driver. In another instance, he was thrown from his car during a race at Monza, his body thrown violently from the vehicle. Then, in 1955, while driving for Mercedes-Benz at the Le Mans race, an infamous crash left his car shattered. The collision at Le Mans was one of the most catastrophic moments in racing history, but somehow Fangio, unlike many of his peers, survived these calamities. In 1981, Fangio, now retired from racing, was invited back to Italy to be the guest of honor at the prestigious Monza Grand Prix. It was during this event that something extraordinary happened that would leave a lasting impact on Horacio Pagani's future. The newly designed McLaren MP41, a car ahead of its time, spun off the track and crashed into a barrier, a frightening and near-deadly crash. The remarkable part of this story was that the driver, John Watson, emerged from the wreckage unharmed. The key to Watson's miraculous survival was the MP41's design, a revolutionary carbon fiber monocoque chassis. This single, continuous piece of carbon fiber enveloped the driver, forming an almost impenetrable shell around him. The lightweight yet incredibly strong nature of carbon fiber absorbed the energy of the crash, protecting Watson and allowing him to walk away with only minor injuries. This was a groundbreaking moment in the world of racing, and it wasn't just about the car's ability to withstand a crash, it was about the material that made this possible: carbon fiber. The use of carbon fiber in racing cars was in its infancy at the time, and the significance of this new material was only beginning to be understood. The carbon fiber monocoque was not just a safety innovation, it was a paradigm shift in how cars were built. The material provided not only unmatched strength but also an extraordinary lightness that made the car quicker, more agile, and far more efficient. The racing world had just witnessed the future of automotive engineering, and Horacio Pagani, a man who had spent his entire life studying the mechanics of beauty and speed, knew this was the future. The survival of Watson, encased in the carbon fiber cocoon, was proof that this material had a place in not just racing cars but in production cars as well. It was lightweight, strong, and capable of saving lives, but the industry hadn't yet caught up to its potential. At the time, very few engineers and designers, particularly in the world of high-performance supercars, truly understood how to work with carbon fiber. It was a challenge to mold and shape, and the technology to mass-produce it was still very much in its infancy. In short, carbon fiber was still a mystery, one that Horacio Pagani was determined to solve. At Lamborghini, where Horacio was working at the time, the management didn't quite see the potential of carbon fiber. They were focused on what they had always done, building beautiful, powerful cars that were fast and exotic. They didn't care much for the idea of a new material that might make their cars even better, faster, lighter, and more efficient. Lamborghini was still clinging to the past, using traditional materials like steel and aluminum, while Pagani was already dreaming of the future. He believed that carbon fiber could not only revolutionize the performance of cars, but also their design, blending engineering with artistry in a way that had never been done before. It was this frustration with Lamborghini's refusal to embrace innovation that drove Horacio to make a bold decision. Rather than continuing to fight for a change in direction within the company, he took matters into his own hands. Horacio Pagani went to the bank, took out a gigantic loan, and bought an autoclave, a massive oven used to cure carbon fiber. The autoclave was essential for making carbon fiber parts, as it applied heat and pressure to the material, making it stronger and lighter than anything traditional car makers were using. Horacio's determination to use carbon fiber was not just about building a faster car, it was about building a car that was a work of art, a car that would change the automotive world. He was obsessed with carbon fiber, not just because it was the future, but because it allowed him to combine the beauty of art with the precision of science. He wanted to create cars that were not just machines, but masterpieces, vehicles that were as stunning to look at as they were to drive. His efforts were not without challenge. Carbon fiber was still in its experimental phase, and working with it required incredible precision and skill. But Horacio's passion was unshakable, and with his newfound autoclave, he began working tirelessly, developing new techniques for working with the material. He created prototypes, tested them, and refined them. The result was a car that was unlike anything the world had seen before. a car that would be both breathtaking in its design and revolutionary in its performance. The Countach Evoluzione, built using carbon fiber, was a prototype that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in automotive design. It was lightweight, incredibly fast, and was a proof of concept that carbon fiber could be the future of supercar construction. Though Lamborghini didn't embrace his vision, Pagani proved to the world that carbon fiber was not just a material, it was the future of automotive design. It was the material that would allow him to create the Pagani Zonda, a car that would go on to become one of the most iconic supercars in history. Horacio's commitment to carbon fiber, which he had pursued in the face of skepticism and resistance, would ultimately lead to the creation of a car that embodied everything he had dreamed of. The Pagani Zonda would become not just a car, but a symbol of artistry, engineering, and the power of innovation. It was a machine built from the ground up with carbon fiber, a material that had once been a distant dream, but was now the foundation of one of the world's most coveted supercars. It was this passion for innovation, for beauty, and for craftsmanship that made Horacio Pagani a true visionary in the automotive world.